Welcome to Coming from Left Field, where we have conversations about politics, books, and current events with your host, Greg Goddles and Pat Cummings. I have a recurring nightmare. I'm in a boardroom with a group of middle manager level types. Someone's droning on with jargon filled nonsense about mission statements or compliance reports or how to think outside the box, all in support of soul crushing, meaningless work. I want to be reading a good book, having coffee with friends, walking on a trail in the woods, or listening to Bill Evans on headphones. But no, I'm nodding my head, an assuring smile and focused gaze, lobotomized by my desire to make it to retirement without inadvertently blurting out what I really think. Sounds familiar? Let's discuss. Warm greetings, everybody. Greg and I are excited to have Leigh Claire La Berge on our podcast today. And you're in New York. Greg's in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I'm in the very, very hot Pacific Northwest. And I came across you, Leigh Claire, when somebody sent a comment to me and said, you really need to interview this person. I looked at one of your YouTube videos. You were on something in Seattle, some podcast. Sent the book to Greg. He says, I like her. Let's let's. She sounds interesting. It sounds really bright and fun. So we are really excited to have you on our podcast to talk about your book, Fake Work: How I Began to Suspect That Capitalism is a Joke. For those of you who are watching and not listening, I stole your cover and put it behind me. It's sort of like a severance thing, isn't it? Kind of a, little cubicles and so forth behind me, that your artist that did this.
Yeah, I mean, well, severance is also like the cubicles, you know?
Right, right, right. So you have just a fascinating story, beginning with getting a philosophy degree as an undergraduate, and it's about 2000. The Y2K bug is threatening everybody, and you decided to jump in and make a little bit of money and work with trying to resolve that. You chronicled and did memoirs as you were going along with your work, and after the fact came back and had some good notes to look at your life then and now. And I don't know. You tell a better story than I do. You tell me. Is that
Okay.
about right?
Yeah, I'll just make a few tweaks. So I graduated from college with a degree in philosophy in 1998. And, this was really the height of the dot-com bubble, sort of the emergence of, I think now what we could see in retrospect is these, you know, frequent asset bubbles that the loose money and the low interest rates sort of beget. But I think that the first sort of great asset bubble of the third millennia of our era really started in the mid 1990s in the dot-com sector. And I graduated in 1998 and I went to college in Massachusetts and was very excited to move to New York City and join one of these dot-com companies. The sort of prevailing wisdom was even a trained monkey could get a job at a dot-com company. That's how desperate they were for workers. I myself could not get one. I tried. I didn't get one. But I did get hired. I got hired at a large global communications conglomerate that in the book I just referred to as the conglomerate. And I got hired on a particular kind of project, which was a Y2K project. And some listeners and viewers might know what Y2K is, and some may have heard of it,
Well,
and some may not know.
give us a background because
Yeah. So Y2K was the sort of uh, narrativized fear that when the third millennium began, December 31st, 1999, or at 11:59 when the third millennium was set to begin, computers would not be able to process the date change because of the way that their calendars had been coded in the 1970s and 80s to just be stable at 19, the first four digits, not have the second digit, not have the ability to enumerate 20. And, this was, in a sense, a real problem. People did fix it, but it was a very specific problem and a very technical problem. And it quickly took on sort of larger than life apocalyptic doomsday scenarios. So I was hired at a large communications company to work on their Y2K project. And I think in retrospect, it's easy and perhaps sort of necessary to see that the flip side of the dot-com era and all the easy money and the newly created millionaires and the IPOs and anybody can get a job, everybody can be their own banker. This was the moment where E-Trade started. Everybody can be a millionaire was the hit game show. But there was a sort of dark side too of American narrativization and storytelling, and that was that if this Y2K crisis wasn't handled correctly, all of global technology could cease on the first day of the third millennium of the year 2000. And in which case we all might be, launched back to some sort of a prelapsarian time. And, when I talk about it now, I do so rather glibly, but these stories and these anxieties were absolutely real.
It's a big deal.
Um,
Mhm.
Yeah, it was considered a big deal, and I was hired to help this company prepare for that, but on the legal side of things. So not prepare as in fix computer code, but prepare as in if the conglomerate that I worked for was sued for a Y2K malfunction, the conglomerate could defend itself in a court of law by saying, "Look, we have this incredible paper trail showing all of these things that we did." So I spent my days documenting and checking documentation. And the way a corporate paper trail works is, one person documents what they're doing, somebody reviews that documentation, someone else reviews that, someone else reviews that, and it just sort of goes on ad infinitum. So while I was there doing that, I started writing my own story of what it was that I was doing and doing little character studies. And, the whole job was so surreal in so many ways that I thought I should have a record of this or someone should. So I did write quite a bit while I was there in 1998 and 1999 and 2000. But I could never really get it to cohere as a book. And then in 2021, I had a grant and I had some time off teaching and I returned to the text and was sort of able to write the story anew.
And you're seeing it through different eyes and so
Hmm.
forth. I don't think you mentioned this in your book, but this was kind of a Naomi Klein shock doctrine thing. There was a crisis about to happen, and a lot of these companies just swept in and used this as an excuse to really extract a lot of wealth from these companies. You were working at the I think it was Arthur Anderson, which right after this happened, they were cooking the books at Enron and shredding things, and
Uh-huh.
they're not an ethical company. Well, maybe that's not maybe the right thing. How do I know if they're ethical or not? But they definitely were playing fast and furious with their accounting practices.
Hmm.
And you say in your book that they just kept on as a mantra, just as your meditative mantra every morning, that Y2K is not a documentation problem.
No, it is.
I mean, it is a documentation problem. It's not a technology problem, and that's kind of central to the core of your work. Describe what you meant by that.
Absolutely. So that was the first thing I heard on the first day at the office when I had a PowerPoint presentation for new employees, and that was what guided us throughout. And again, the idea was that if there was going to be a problem with Y2K for this conglomerate, the problem would be that another company would sue it. So the company would have to prepare to be sued, and what they would mount as their defense is this incredible paper trail saying these are all of the things that we did. And one could go even further and say if you mount a paper trail large enough, your opponent in litigation might not be even able to get through it. If you submerge them in so much paper, so much documentation, a trial might not be necessary. So this is what guided us, producing the maximum amount of paper, of documentation, of text, and showing how it was produced and who produced it, and that had been checked and rechecked and rechecked and rechecked. And to give you a sense of what I was actually doing, every day I would get a collection of spreadsheets, Excel spreadsheets, and I would compare what was on the spreadsheet with what was in a database. And if there was any, lack of reconciliation, if any mistakes had been made, I would just note that. So that's what I did every day. I didn't fix it, I just noted it, and then these documents were stored. And that's what the whole office was doing every day, comparing Excel spreadsheets and photocopying them and storing them. And the idea was if we could just do this right up till the last day of the second millennium, that would be enough. So that's what I did. And the work was stultifying, mind-numbing, surreal. Um, but it did put me in the place where I wanted to be, which was, in the center of global capitalism, Midtown
Right.
Manhattan, working for a Fortune, I don't know if it was a Fortune 100 firm yet, but certainly close to it. And so that was an incredible experience for me. And I got I actually got to have a meeting with one of the chief officers, not the CEO, but one of the C-suite, as they say, in the CEO's office. And of course, the thing that's so surreal about this is I was 22. I had no idea about computers. I had no idea about advertising. I had no idea about anything. But a body needed to be there, so I was there,
Right.
and that was sort of the logic that maintained the whole thing.
Greg, when I sent you this information in the book, you said it sounds a lot like bullshit jobs. Who's the fellow that wrote that book in a
David
way?
Graeber. David Graeber.
Yeah, yeah. You see
And
parallels
well,
there
and
with.
also on a pop basis, Mad Men. I mean, I love the hell out of
Mm,
Mad Men as a show on AMC, but I think a lot of people missed the underlying theme of all this waste of work. I mean, people were just going through motions, and it was more about sucking up to people than it was about producing anything of any real value. So, I mean, there's all that going on. I think more and more people are asking this question. Graeber was an anthropologist. He's passed away, and he did it from a theoretical perspective.
Mhm.
But what I like about this book so much is it's something that more people can grab because it's not just theory, it's really the actual living of a bullshit job. And what Arthur Anderson is selling is insurance,
Mhm.
essentially. I mean, this is a tertiary capitalist
Mhm.
function.
Mhm.
Today you turn on your TV. I watch the old people's channels. You can guess why I watch the old people's channels, Perry Mason, so on, because of my age. But the commercials are all selling insurance, whether it's
Mhm.
Medicare, the bullshit uh,
Part
part.
B, Part D,
Yeah, but it's the
the
Medicare
add-ons.
Advantage that's
Oh,
the
Advantage. Okay.
that's the scam. And but then you also have, you work these up, do this on your car. You need insurance from your electrical pole to your house and
Mhm.
that and all of it's got hitches in it. And what Arthur Anderson's doing too is they're
Mhm.
insuring themselves. In other words,
Mhm.
they're doing the kind of job that if they get drug into court,
Mhm.
they're going to be able to explain what they're doing. So it's like layers and layers of insurance and assurance. And it's pretty wild. It's fun.
There's many ironies in what you just said. Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. I mean, the ultimate irony is, of course, Arthur Anderson, the gold seal of compliance, is cooking their own books and
That's
cooking the books of Enron. and are court ordered to cease operations for obstruction of justice. But, and absolutely, absolutely, they're selling insurance, the conglomerates buying insurance, the Y2K crisis is in a sense fabricated to encourage people to buy insurance. But if it hadn't been Y2K, it'd be something else. I mean, this is how the system works. There's, in a certain way, there's no uniqueness in this crisis because all of these crises have a similar logic and offer similar profit opportunities. The one thing I would say is, this book often gets compared when I do book events, interviews like this one, to David Graeber's Bullshit Jobs. And I think in many ways, yes, there's absolute overlap and similarities. And I like the idea that, he presents a sort of global case study and this is an individual narrativized study. But one thing I think this book offers that I think Graeber doesn't get into that I think is important is, this work, as meaningless and surreal as it was for the company, for society, was nonetheless incredibly significant to me, right? I mean, this is the job that got me interested in thinking about what is capitalism? What is
Hmm.
political economy? What does it mean to have a critique of that system? All questions I might add, I had never been asked at a very, elite liberal arts college. So, in a way, the book has a sort of, I think, a bit of a Marxist Bildungsroman
Right.
sheen to it because it is in this meaningless work that I find meaning. And it was a very subjectively rich experience for me, very educationally and politically rich too, And so I think that what Graeber does is for him the category of bullshit work. It produces resentment and antagonism, and it produces a kind of class allegiance, but it doesn't necessarily produce a transformed subjectivity.
And that's
And I
your
think
that.
that's something we need to be attentive to.
Yeah, I
Subjects are made in this world.
But he doesn't depart from a cultural level. I mean, it's really a cultural,
right.
uh, it's a reaction that you have to the meaninglessness of it. It's
Hmm.
not so much what the deep political
Hmm.
economy of it
Hmm.
is, and that's what's important. You read it's if you read chapter one of Capital, if you open up the book and you it says commodities and he starts with that, you begin reading it, you realize that commodities are a feature of capitalism. I mean, it's utility is behind it, and what utility is shaped again and again and again. I mean, people in the beginnings of capitalism couldn't imagine what becomes commodified 100 years later. People today are struggling to imagine how
Hmm.
a derivative becomes a commodity if it does become a
Hmm.
commodity. But yeah, it calls for a deeper analysis, and I'm glad you found your way to Marx because sadly today few people are, and I think that's where we all should find our answers. So
Right.
appreciate.
I just back to the bullshit jobs. I mean, I had never read the book, but when Greg mentioned it, I looked it up, and they have they have shit jobs, which is like picking up garbage, and those are valuable jobs that people have
Hmm.
to do. But the bullshit jobs are these jobs that involve unnecessary bureaucracy, middle management, bureaucrats. They're just mindless, soul sucking, and the people who are doing the jobs are somewhat aware that these jobs probably shouldn't exist. And I loved the term you used, this Bolgemont, the
Bildung?
transition. Yeah,
Bildung.
right. How do you pronounce it?
Bildung?
Yeah, right. That is this transition of you kind of morally changing, having insight, looking at what you've done, growing, reevaluating. Um, and that's kind of the whole point of the book is that you were placed in this, but it acted as a catalyst for you to really become a better, more informed, better person from the experience. I don't know.
I'm not sure a better person, but definitely more informed. And it
Right.
definitely was, an educational catalyst and a political catalyst as well.
Right.
I do think, you know, it's funny in the book, um, I attend to what I imagined happened to some of my colleagues after the,
Mm.
millennium ended and yeah, the second millennium ended, the third millennium began, and we all went our separate ways. But I have to say, my understanding from working with them for, 16 or 17 months is that many of them did not find the work bullshit and that they
Oh,
were really believers and really partisans, I mean, real partisans. And I would have loved the opportunity to discuss with them what they thought after Arthur Andersen, the firm for whom many of them worked, collapsed in a cloud of smoke. I mean, just a total implosion. Like, did that produce a kind of Copernican revolution in them? I don't know, but I don't think it's right to say that in Graeber's language, they were aware that they were doing bullshit work. I mean, they were devoted to the firm and to doing what needs to be done, and whatever needs to be done, they're going to do. And, one of my favorite scenes in the book is when um, I come into work January 3rd, 2000, and nothing has happened, and here we've spent 16 months and however many millions of dollars, and it's like no one even said, well, what was this? Or what happened? Or I mean, I'm not expecting, as I say in the book, like a Maoist self-criticism session, but something just sort of like, what did we do? What was the meaning? For them, it was just, okay, our work here is done. Let's go on to the next project.
it's
Like that was an
self-significant.
event. And, there's a sense in which both, I think, in corporate history and even in the fields of business, I mean, and for good reason, not a well-developed historical aptitude. It's like one bubble crashes and you start building the next one. And, that is very much, I think, the logic of capital as it develops. And so in that sense, I think this experience I had was, riding a bubble on a certain portion of the wave, right? Like catching it at its apex and catching it as it starts to go down a little, but not yet there for the implosion.
Well, I'm interested in your process. I mean, not the process you talk about,
Not
the
the
process,
process,
but
right?
your process,
Yeah,
because there's a lot of, younger people out there who are, as you say, they buy in. And I read, to some extent, I read you as having a little bit of a buy-in. I mean, you wanted to go into business. And
absolutely.
so then there's this process begins, your process
Mhm.
begins. How does it change? I mean, when do you start getting an inkling, and when do you start thinking, what does this mean? And then when
Mhm.
do you start to apply a meaning to it? How did that?
It's such a great question. And these moments, I'm a professor in my day job now that I'm no longer a corporate documenteer. Um, and if these are the moments that I wish I could pinpoint and that I wish I could pinpoint for students. I mean, these are also moments of political transformation. But when you say there was a buy-in, I mean, there was a huge buy-in. I was ready to go, sign me up. I thought this is really the apex of American culture at a moment where American culture and American business is itself at an apex. I thought this is fantastic. I mean, I couldn't wait to get to Midtown. Um, how did the disillusionment start? I mean, it's something that, of course, I try to trace in the book through these different scenes.
Mhm.
I think for me, the the process of starting to keep my own documentation just out of a sense of total and complete existential boredom. I mean, reading spreadsheets for 8 hours a day, day after day after day. Not, I mean, even if you thought you were looking for something in the spreadsheets that were meaningful, but we didn't even have that. And in the process of starting to write down, like, because I would tell these stories to friends, like, oh, you never believe what I did this week, and people would say, is your job real? Is this real? Like, what do you mean this is what you're doing? And of course, in the latter half of the book, I start getting to do this international travel and I fly to Johannesburg for a 20-minute meeting. And the whole thing took on an aspect of such surreal and absurdist storytelling that I began to find that enjoyable. And in trying to capture what those aspects were, um, I started asking myself questions that I think was the opening of a certain kind of, a certain kind of worldview, a certain kind of openness to be challenged and to be corrected, right? I mean, I think that is always a moment of political awakening when you say, I had been wrong, I have been wrong. Things could be different. What else could they be? Um, but why did that happen to me and not somebody else? I don't know. I mean, what would have happened if I hadn't been given this Y2K job, but just a standard, job, a paralegal at a corporate law firm where this is all I was doing? I think I would have been disillusioned and I think I would have walked away, but I'm not sure I would have gotten the sense of excitement and wonder at thinking about capitalism as a system that this book or that this experience delivered to me. But again, I did not walk into that job thinking that's what I was getting. I really walked in wanting to be the same kind of partisan that I found. I mean, it was really a reactionary moment, I think, for me, to turn away from philosophy, to turn away from post-structuralism, and to say, okay, I've had enough with this. I want to make money. That's the ethos that is prevalent, that is rewarded. I want to join. So I can be sympathetic to that part of myself. And I can be sympathetic when I hear young people say that today. Um, but I do think that for me in this experience, you know, the ability to have it transition from one thing into another is a kind of idiosyncrasy that I still don't fully, understand. And that's after, 13 years of psychoanalysis even.
Well,
Good.
I was just gonna ask you about one of the characters. I thought one of the most interesting characters, but sort of unresolved characters in your account was Lenny. I think that was her name, Elliot.
Laney.
Lenny.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she was European, and you paint a vivid picture of her. And personally, there's an element of that, but there's also her family. She came from Germany, and there's in the
Austria.
back, I'm sorry.
Austria.
Austria, I'm sorry, yeah. And there's a history connection with the Nazi era and a kind of a dark one. And she's an interesting character because you
Hmm.
can't get a grasp of how she views the world. I couldn't. Could
Hmm.
you fill that out to some extent? I mean, you obviously were she stood out to you for you and for me,
Yeah.
but what was she about? How did she understand where she was and where you the two of you were?
I think that for both of us, there was an element of escape, of escaping our backgrounds, of escaping our family. So I come from an academic family. My parents were both historians, and I grew up in a very, middle class, I mean, actually Appalachian setting. I grew up in southwestern Virginia. And the idea of moving to New York City and becoming a businessman seemed so exciting and such a break from my sort of academic Appalachian past. Um, Lainey came from a sort of fallen aristocratic family in Austria, which itself is, just an interesting history. I mean, if you know the history of what happens to Austria from, the end of the First World War through the Second World War and through the present. And she had a very, I think, difficult family life, and she too wanted an escape. And she got, through different personal and employment connections, she found her way to an internship with an airline, which got her from Austria to London, and then I think eventually got her this internship with an airline, which is a global company, to New York. But the interesting thing about her is that, you asked me, what was it about me that allowed me to have this awakening? One thing that I knew that I had to be very careful of if I did want to be a successful management consultant, businessman, partisan, you have to not ask questions and you have to not attract attention to yourself. And I have that desire all the time. I didn't, I suppressed it while I was working there, but I certainly knew that I had it and that if it were to come out, uh, it would spell trouble for my, hopefully ascendant career. Lainey had that desire too, but she did not suppress it. She let it go. So I was, of course, very attracted to her personality in the sense that I could recognize in her, like, I could be that. There's a sort of dramatic scene in the book where she confronts our managing director, and refuses to back down. And he tells her, "You're on my shit list now." And she says, "Okay." You know, um, but at the same time, I also knew, like, I don't want to be her for this job. I don't want to be her. But then through these very surreal circumstances, I mean, I keep using this word, but it was surreal that we both got hired. Neither one of us knew anything about documentation. Neither one of us knew anything about computers. Neither one of us knew anything about business. Basically, the conglomerate that I worked for said to this headhunter, "Look, whoever walks in Thursday afternoon, send them over and we'll hire them." And it was me and Lainey. And so somehow there's this very serendipitous randomness to the whole experience. But she was very worldly. She was a wonderful person to see the world with. We traveled all over the world together. We journeyed through Latin America together. We were in Europe together. Um, and she, right when we left this job, when the second millennium ended without incident and the third millennium began, the conglomerate that we worked for offered all of us who'd been on the Y2K team a new position within it. And only two of us walked away, and that was me and Lainey. We both said, this is not for us. Um, but she eventually did go back into corporate America.
Mm.
Um, I did not. Um, so we had a very nice sort of mutual affinity during our time as kind of outcasts or potential outcasts at the conglomerate, but we were unable to maintain that connection when I went to graduate school and she went back to corporate America.
You must have a lot of people come up to you and just say, "Oh my God, you're telling my story." Oh, because when I read this, it's just like I wanted to just call you up and say, "I just have to talk to you about how much of the parallels." You're a therapist for a lot of people that have gone through this kind of the trauma of being employed, and then years later looking back and saying, I just this was not a good experience. This was not good work I was doing. I don't know. What are your thoughts about that?
Obviously, the all of the names that I use in the book are anonymized, and the company is anonymized to protect people's privacy. Arthur Andersen is not anonymized, but that's only because they don't exist and haven't for years, and so there's no liability. But it never occurred to me that anybody that I worked with would read this book. That anyone that I worked with while at the conglomerate on their Y2K project. I mean, for the simple reason that they don't read books. Um, and this book came out with Haymarket Press, which is a left-wing publisher. Um, but the night that I did my first book event in New York City, I was taking the train home and I was checking my email, and I see an email from someone whose name I don't quite, register, that uses the real name of the company. And I thought, oh my God, like, what is this? And I open it, and it's from somebody who had the cubicle next to mine
Mm.
who said, "I found your book. She said, I disagree with some of the characterizations, but I agree with the whole thing." She said, "I have gone on to become an analyst for what's the defense company? Northrop
Northrop
Grumman?
yeah.
Yeah,
Hmm.
okay. I really appreciate that you wrote this and that you've had success." And I just wrote back to her and said, "Thank you, whatever." And then about a month later, I got another email from her, a very long one, that said, "I reread your book, and reflecting on it, I can see that so much of my life has been wasted working at these firms, and that the only really meaningful thing I've done as an adult is having a child because I enjoy caring for her." But she goes on and on and on. And, in a way, that's a sort of wonderful email to get, right? And I do, you're right. I get a lot of them, including some that should scare us all. I got one from a lieutenant at a nuclear naval facility somewhere saying, we're just doing the same thing here, pushing papers. It's all bullshit. I mean, that you sort of are hoping for a better outcome at somebody monitoring, a nuclear warhead. Um, but I think it, it, I mean, I'm glad it sparks something in my readers. That's what every writer hopes for. At the same time, I hope people will take from the book that this doesn't need to be our state of affairs, right? That there would be different ways to organize social infrastructure and social value, right? And what Greg was alluding to this whole sort of tertiary level of capitalist surplus value production, where everyone's insuring everybody and suing everybody and monitoring everybody, like that makes up a large part of advanced industrial economies. You know, that is it's I don't want to use the word waste because in a capitalist system there is no waste because people are still making money. But at the level of social development and human development and personal development, um, that does not need to be our state of affairs. And when I say I hope people take that from the book, it's not take it as me as an example of, such a great thinker or philosopher, but more me as an example of keep your mind and your imagination active and see what kind of questions you can ask. And that's also said with a real modesty because I think a lot of these jobs are so deadening and exhausting that people don't have the energy to keep their minds active and to ask questions. And one can't begrudge them for that either, right? I mean, that's sort of how the labor market is set up to function right now, and there are no signs of it getting better, and if anything, we're in a sort of new bubble, very similar to the dot-com one, which is the AI bubble. I mean, there's so many similarities to our own moment and to
Right.
1998, 1999. Where does it go? What is next? But yeah, it is really nice hearing from people, including from other consultants, because
And
this
and it
is,
and
sorry, go ahead.
it was when you were away from it, and because you had your notes, and because you could
Yes,
revisit it, then you looked at it through
yes,
different eyes. You looked through it through, and you learned from it, and your foundational exploration and then scholarship in Marx gave you a filter of how one could
yes.
that's just like that's like such a good story, you
I,
know.
I, I I can't help noting that there's a class division that just pops up in my mind as I'm listening. Because I have some of the same experiences. I spent ten years in a corporate job, which I hated, but I was a Marxist before I took the job, though they didn't know that. But so it was easier to digest. I knew it was just shit work and it
Yeah,
was phony stuff and a pep talk about we got to all do this. But I got to bring up the class divide
yeah.
because I grew up in a working class family and most of my work life was in the working class.
Hmm.
And there, everyone knows they hate their work.
Hmm.
It's an illusion. My family were all coal miners. They
Hmm.
didn't think, oh, what's the meaning of the work we're doing? You can imagine, Saturday Night Live satirizing that. Oh, here I find myself in a coal mine.
Right,
Meaning can I draw from this? It didn't exist.
right.
And so growing up, I had the impression. So my two daughters both have jobs like this on this. They're educated, so they have
Hmm.
kind of jobs that we're talking about and they don't like them. I hope
Yeah,
nobody's listening but they don't like them. And I say, well, that's why they call it work. Because when I grew up and when I started working, I was 13 in the
yeah,
summer and so on. It was assumed you didn't like what you're doing. You're doing it to make money and live. That's what
yeah,
you're basically doing. So there is this bifurcation here. There is this
yes,
sharp line between people that say, what's the meaning of what I'm doing? And
yes,
people say, I hate this, but I got
yes.
to do it. Yeah, I think the gig workers are probably that way. They don't want to be gig workers.
Yes, and you're absolutely right to bring up the question of class. And it's absolutely important. It's absolutely imperative. It's a crucial part of the story, right? Now, I did grow up in Appalachia, so I do understand what it means to work. Actually, when I grew up, there were no coal mines even anymore. That work is
Yeah.
gone too. But no, absolutely. And when I teach, I teach a lot of working class students, and when I teach David Graeber's bullshit jobs, a lot of my students say, "Are you kidding? I would love to have a bullshit job. Like,
Mhm,
I'm,
mhm,
cleaning
Right.
out bedpans or like
mhm,
bleaching syringes. Like, give me a bullshit job. Like, this
Yeah,
would be amazing." So,
I can do it.
no, absolutely. That's
mhm,
absolutely true.
mhm,
Um, and I think also for me, there was a class element in thinking, okay, I'm from this middle class family. I don't want to be middle class. I want to be upper middle class. That's why I want a job like this,
Mhm.
right? And there's a disillusionment there as well. But no, I mean that's absolutely true. I just did want to say something to Pat's comment about the what is, the therapist role and people wanting to talk about the book. And one of the things that I tried to do in the book is make Marxism and make the critique of political economy, make it fun and
mhm,
make it funny and make it pleasurable. Because I do think that's an avenue for expanding the base of the critique and expanding what kind of people might affiliate with it and what kind of people might ask these questions and what kind of people might consider these problems. Um, so, the book is sort of written in a way, Pat, I think that it invites that. So I take that as a sort of measure of success of the book.
you're funny and the book's funny.
Yeah.
And when you look back at what you did and you're looking back at it almost like you're writing a sitcom. I mean, but there is a tragedy, I think, that as people are in these jobs, they don't necessarily know how bad it is until I retired and went back and had financial stability. And then I start to revisit the fact what I was doing. For example, I started a .com and it did curriculum mapping, online testing, um, educational standards, alignment, that type of thing. And it's still going, and it's bought by Pearson or by one of these big conglomerate, made $500 million. They are doing horrible they're doing horrible work. They're narrowing the curriculum. They're doing teaching to the test. There's no creativity. They're being authoritarian with teachers. They're being one size fits all. The overemphasis of educational testing, the lack, it's horrible. But I wasn't in a position when I was getting my paycheck and trying to put two kids through college to sit back and be honest about it.
Mhm.
And I think that's the value of your book is that you just tell such a good story about
Thanks.
reflecting on it with
Hmm.
honesty and integrity of where you are right now. So
Hmm.
I don't know.
You have a remarkable bullshit detector. You really do, and that's what makes the book so I think so wonderful to read. So a question arises, and that is, with your very very acute and sharp bullshit detector, now that you're in academia,
Hmm.
is there perhaps a little bullshit floating around there as well?
Oh
Oh,
You
God,
picked
so
she's
much.
anything?
I
throwing that
Have
think
because
you picked anything up around that?
she picked another career that's just, it's like
so
Thelma and
much.
Louise going off the cliff. I mean,
There is so much, but I do have to say, as much as there is in the past year and a half, with the introduction of ChatGPT and these bots and these abilities of AI to do this work, you know, I mean, to call it bullshit, who knows what it is? I don't even recognize what it is anymore. It's like now these large learning platforms, these learning language platforms, things like Chalk or Canvas or Blackboard or Brightspace are introducing AI features into the classroom management system so that the professor can use AI to grade the paper. So the student uses AI to write it, the professor uses AI to grade it. At a certain point, somebody's going to get smart to this and say, we got to cut out the middleman. Now, who is the middleman? Is it the student or the professor or the university itself or all of the above? And, I think what we're witnessing is a rampant de-skilling. Now, we're a de-skilling of literacy, a de-skilling of reading, a de-skilling of writing. I do think we have to remain a little bit ecumenical about it. Like, there are many such de-skillings, and many of these skills we no longer miss. Like I could never darn a pair of socks. 100 years ago, not to have that skill would have been a real loss. Now it seems just intuitive. Oh, you don't have, your sock ripped? Order 12 socks from China. That's the thing to do, right? What does it mean when we become post-literate? I mean, I just don't know. But that's where the academy is right now. I do think the difference, one thing that corporate America does better, that the academy, I think in many ways, corporate America, or certainly the conglomerate that I worked for, treats its workforce better, pays it better. There's no equivalent in the corporate workforce, or there wasn't then, to like adjunctification or the sort of, I mean, just absolute decimating of the professoriate. Because of course, in business, like money is also a language of respect. So in the academy, you're asked to work for free all the time. I was never asked that at the conglomerate. Um, so there are these sort of odd differences, but overall, it's two different types of bullshit. It's two different types of alienation. I mean, I have more time. That's why I selected the career, because I have time to do something like write this book. And were I still working at that job, I would not have time. Um, but I think I'm probably part of the last, or, second to last generation of people who will have tenured track work or tenured work. Um, and then we'll see. And I do think that what protections I have, excuse me, as a professor come not necessarily from tenure, but from being at a public university where we have a okay union, but it's all unionized work. We have unionized
Mhm.
protection. I'm in New York State, but certainly from my colleagues in right to work states in the South, in the Midwest, I mean that this this whole career arc is coming to an end, as maybe did the kind of job that I wrote about, the dot-com career arc came to an end in 2001 and 2002 when that economy crashed.
I want to talk about Marx. You wrote a book called, well, after you did your job, you started to read Capital and, all
Grundrisse, all of it.
Marx. Right, right. I did the same thing after hanging out with Greg. I read Capital top to bottom. Honest to God, I did.
All three
And
volumes or just the first one?
the first one, Jesus, I'm not crazy. But the point is, it's like the alcoholic that quits drinking and starts doing yoga and meditating. They're going, "Oh my God, the world is different. I'm seeing the world differently. I'm processing things differently." And you started to do that, and you did it with a book called Marx for Cats, which you're sitting and teaching principles of Marxism to your cats. Now, that sounds just crazy as hell, but when you look at your videos, it's actually it's actually a fun way,
Yeah.
a humorous way to express really important concepts that have great value to people's life that aren't being
Yeah.
expressed in any other way. I don't know. Did I
Cats'
catch
lives
that?
too. No, cats' lives too.
And cats' lives too.
The
Yeah.
book, yeah. So actually, when I left that job at the conglomerate, I went to graduate school, and my first book was called Scandals and Abstraction, and it is about finance in American literature in the 1980s. And that was a book that was deeply motivated by my stint in corporate America, trying to understand like how it is that representations of the economy affect what people perceive the economy as, or how stories we tell about the economy affect what people understand we're able to do to and with and for the economy and so on. And then I wrote a second book called Wages Against Artwork, which was about how people essentially don't get paid to work in creative sectors. And
Mm-hmm.
much of this work is done for free.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so those are my two sort of really academic books. But when I started writing Marx for Cats, or when I started experimenting with Marx and cats, um, I had sort of come to a point where I realized, okay, I want to have a broader audience to discuss political economy with. I want, like, I don't just need to talk to other academics who read Marx. I want to talk to people, artists about Marx, students about Marx, whomever about Marx, anybody walking down the street about Marx. Um, and because I had written a book about art, I got invited a lot to lecture at artist residencies and talk to artists. And my partner, who is an artist, said, why don't you make a series of videos in which you just explain Marxist concepts for artists? Because she said artists don't read, which is maybe true, maybe not true. But I said, like, I just can't hear myself explain Marx anymore. I'm just too bored with it. She said, but what if you were explaining it to cats? And we started these videos and they were so much fun. And in a way, they gave me a new appreciation for Marx. Um, and then when a publisher asked if I could turn it into a book, I was like, I don't think so. But the COVID pandemic hit, and I was just sort of trapped in my house. And I had this sort of crazy, really sort of artistic like thought. I think this is how artists work. You asked before, Greg, about the question of process. I thought, okay, I'm going to look at the last 1,000 years of economic history for every reference to a cat and see what I can come up with and see if I could use that to narrate capitalism. And the archive was there. I mean, it just fell into my lap. But the thing I love about that book that I hope, that I think fake work also does or will do is because of the title, Marx for Cats, people just pick it up. They don't know what it is. I mean, what does that even mean, Marx for Cats? And people buy it at the Barnes and Nobles in Dayton, Ohio, and they buy it here, they buy it there. And then they start thinking, well, what does it mean? What is Marx? Who is Marx? What is Marxism? What could we do with this? So Marx for Cats and Fake Work are both parts of what I think of as the project of developing a kind of vernacular Marxism,
Right.
right? A Marxism that anybody who's half sentient or a quarter sentient, anybody you could have a conversation with about anything, you could also have a conversation with about what is a Marxist critique of a capitalist economy? What does it bring us? What does it offer us? And of course, for Marx for Cats, there's a question of what does it offer animals and how can animals too be members of a political struggle?
You are a crazy cat lady. You realize that, right? This is the book structures a series of lessons drawing parallels between feline behavior and Marxist concepts. For example, you discuss how cats' hunting instincts reflect primitive accumulation, how their domestication speaks to the commodification of life under capitalism. You just have it's just so fun. It's just fun.
It is fun. I hope it's fun. It's supposed to be fun.
I you should do stand-up comedy. You should do like a go to the comedy clubs and just do nothing but a good set of Marxist jokes about, trickle down jokes or I don't know.
It's funny.
Something.
This book, Fake Work, started as I was living in Berlin and a colleague and I were trying to organize Marxist stand-up comedy. So we were going to have
Okay.
on the bill a night of Marxist humor.
Right.
Um, and that was the idea. That was definitely the idea. Unfortunately, I no longer have it in me to hold a stage the way you need to as a comic does. I think I probably could have done it in my late 20s. I don't have it now. That's over. Um, but I appreciate it. And the goal of both books is to be both, fun and informative, and to use the power of storytelling to tell stories about the economy, to start to imagine how we could have a different economy. I mean,
Mhm.
that's always crucial, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, your first joke is if we eat just one billionaire, the rest will fall in line. That could be, that's Bill Burr does a good job with this, with some of his comedy and how he
Oh, okay.
he brings in the economy and rent and the I don't know. It just it was funny and Cuomo was talking about your new mayor and he was attacking him for making like
Yeah.
$150,000 a year or something like that. Like and he's in rent control apartment.
Yeah.
Who the hell can live in New York City for that? I
Yeah.
mean, without being in rent control.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah,
But his
completely.
obliviousness to the economics of it was, I think, backfired on him, and it
Yeah.
should. he's not a good person, so that's nice. So, any final comments, Greg, before Cat Lady leaves and
I think
goes back to get ready for her class and students?
yeah, I concur. I mean, it's a teaching. This book is a teaching tool, and that's what I think its the greatest value is. I mean, if people read it and it sparks people in the corporate world or in the business world to rethink what they're doing and maybe think there are other options. I find it's a my 10 years, I found there was a lot of variety. There were people who were true believers, there were people that knew it was all bullshit, and there were a lot of people in between
Hmm.
that didn't know what to think about what was going on around them. So if it touches some of those folks in particular and they rethink what they're doing, doesn't mean they got to stop doing it because jobs are scarce. You got to work, but at least you understand what you're doing.
Yeah.
It's work, and
Yeah.
we get in. So I really appreciate it. I think it's a great book, and Pat will tell you I'm very, 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 very uh, tight about my praise. I don't really praise
Yeah,
much. I
he's a
enjoy
kind of a
books.
grouchy old guy, and
Yeah, I
when he
like
likes
being
something,
grouchy. So if I'm not grouchy, I must have liked it.
I
no,
appreciate it too. And thank
yeah,
you guys for having me on. It's also just nice to meet you and to learn of your
yeah,
show.
nice to meet
Well,
you,
you have a
and
book coming? Do you have a book coming?
I do. Well, no, I
oh,
shouldn't say
good.
coming. I'm working on one. But I'm probably halfway through and so it'll be a few years. These things take a while.
Can we keep
Well,
an open date?
Sure.
Okay, look
Absolutely.
okay,
forward to it.
good,
Absolutely.
good.
Look forward to
Well,
it.
Absolutely. It's
that
about healthcare, American healthcare, and the philosopher Michel Foucault. So it's a little bit different, but absolutely, yeah.
Good.
good.
We need it badly, so hurry up.
Okay. Thanks, guys.
All right,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Have a
Listen, I
good day.
really appreciate it.